Thank you, Frank. So thank you so much, commissioners, for joining us this morning. And I'll just kick it over to Carmelyn to say a few words as we get started with this quarterly commissioners meeting.
Great. Thank you, Brittany. It is now 11:05 on Thursday, September 10th, and I'm happy to convene this quarterly commissioners meeting. Welcome to everyone. So nice to see people, even though it's on video, it's still nice to see everyone's faces. You will also see, one, just a reminder that consistent with open meetings law, since this is a quarterly commissioners meeting, this meeting is being recorded. People should be aware of that. And you will see, in addition to some of the familiar faces of commissioners and commission staff, you'll see some other faces. We have our two artists in residence who will be introducing themselves a little bit later on in the meeting. So you will be hearing from them as well, but thank you for joining us, Amanda and Andre. It has been a very, very busy time at the agency with, as you all know, and from the last meeting, there has been a lot going on in the city, and there's been a lot happening in different neighborhoods, particularly in the area of human rights. So there's a lot that we're going to cover in terms of our departmental updates today. Let us start by just taking attendance. Rather than the awkward silence of people having to wait for other people to say, I'm just going to read off names as I see them here. And if you could just say that you're here, that'd be great. Okay. So of course, I'm Commissioner and Chair Carmelyn P. Morales. Carrie Davis.
Here.
All right. Gurdev Kang. Faiza Patel.
Here.
Thank you. Bishop Gonzalez, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Guillermo Chacon.
Present.
Thank you. Jonathan Greenspun.
Hi, I'm here.
Regina Estella. Rocky Chin.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, we have a few other commissioners who are scheduled to join us, so they'll be probably joining in as we chat. But as I said earlier, we've been extremely busy, and I want to just put on this overlay in a time when a lot of calls and queries into the agency have greatly increased, in a time when it's been a very challenging environment to be able to appropriately and effectively continue all of the commission's services in a mostly telework environment, and at a time where, as is public news, there is also a city budget crisis. I have to say I've never been more proud of the staff at this agency. You will hear the departmental updates and you'll understand that people have really been working, at 120%. And what I know to be true, and I think what you will hear, this indicates is just, again, how personally so many of our staff take human rights, and how during this very challenging time for the city and for the country, we have really been putting our best foot forward in order to continue providing services and address the human rights needs across the city. So with that, I'm going to start off with Brittany to talk a little bit about some budget updates, since I'm sure some of you are wondering about that and how budget is being affected in our space. Go ahead, Brittany.
Great. So, as the commissioner mentioned, you've likely seen all the reporting and, been, watching the developments, and the city's budget situation has been growing increasingly dire over the course of the spring and the summer and into the fall. And so the commission, like a number of agencies, I think probably like all agencies, sustained cuts to our budget in the spring. And a part of that was a hiring freeze that prevented us from filling vacancies across departments, which of course is challenging because, as the commissioner mentioned, there is an increasing need for the work that we do. There's always been incredible need for it, but now that is intensified. But it's also, the hiring freeze has made it harder for us to bring folks in. And more recently, you may have heard the mayor talking about the city's advocacy for federal relief, which at this stage, unfortunately, does not look promising. The advocacy around trying to get state borrowing authority to help fill some of the city budget gaps. And, as of yet, that's not, that hasn't come to pass yet. And also some of the negotiations that they've been doing with the unions to try to secure savings. And, the mayor throughout the summer began warning that layoffs might be necessary. But as of last week, it looks as if those plans are on hold, which of course is a source of relief for us and all the other city agencies that are trying to deliver for New Yorkers under these circumstances. But in any case, we're operating under, resource constraints that have become increasingly serious, and we expect that to be the case for some time. But with that in mind, we're trying to think creatively about how we can use the resources that we do have to the greatest possible effect. And as we go through the updates that we're about to launch into, I think you'll see that despite the increasing budgetary limitations and the many, many additional challenges of the last few months, our staff has really continued to deliver for New Yorkers in some really, really impressive ways. And so with that, I will kick it off to a discussion of some of the numbers from our mayor's management report. And I think we were going to start with our LEB numbers, unless Carmelyn, there's anything else you wanted to add here.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit to how budget changes have been affecting us. So you have just the perspective. So to give everyone perspective, if you all remember when many of you joined me at the agency, in 2015, the size of our staff was around 55. The high of our increase in staff was at about 165. So over the course of the years, we grew to about 165 people on payroll / personnel. In the last, especially year and a half, because of all of the budget issues affecting the city, and this includes different hiring freezes that we were also subjected to, and savings targets, and then leading into what has happened in the past few months with hiring freezes and budget cuts, our personnel has basically gone down about 13 to 14%. And that is because as people leave the commission to go to school, as there is like the natural turnover of things, we have had great difficulty because of freezes actually filling those lines. And there have been other situations, like most recently, where even as there's talks of possible layoffs throughout the city, we are continuing to perform all of our services while turnover is happening. People are, again, leaving for school or moving, et cetera, and we are unable to currently fill those lines. So it's important for me to say that because, again, this is really just for me coming out of the pride of the people that are working at the agency. So I'll leave that to Sapna, and she could brag about some of the great work that her team has been doing. Go ahead, Sapna.
Thanks, Carmelyn. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the phenomenal work that the Law Enforcement Bureau has done in the last fiscal year. Even though we were not able to be fully staffed, we've closed a huge number of cases. We closed 1,066 cases, which is really the highest since a long, long time, at least since fiscal year 2004. And the number of days that the cases have been open have come down dramatically too, to 515. That has been the lowest since fiscal year 17. Last year, the last fiscal year, it was 576. And so it's come down pretty significantly because we've been able to address and resolve some of the cases that have been unresolved for quite a while.
And I'm just going to pause on that for a minute. So as folks recall, filing at the agency has continued to increase. So from 2015 through now, filing at the agency has continued to go up. Frankly, the biggest burden for us, the one thing that on the law enforcement side, we've really been trying to address from a process point of view is the fact that because filings have gone up, our case processing time has also gone up, right? So this is obviously very important as we talk about access to justice. We think about delayed justice is in some instances not justice, right? So for us, it's been kind of the big priority target for us to figure out how we can, in this environment, as filings are going up, figure out a way that we can bring case processing time down, because there's obviously, you know, a conflict there. So the fact that we have managed to bring case processing time down in a time of pandemic, or in any time for that matter, is incredibly impressive. And I just want to give it up to Deputy Commissioner Sapna Raj on that, because a lot of personal work has gone into that. So thank you for that.
And I will add that working remotely has been a challenge for us. We are not fully digitalized, and so, you know, there were files that were in the office. How were we going to get it to people? And as we all know, it's very challenging to work from home. Everyone doesn't have a nice little study that they can work out of. So having case files there and calling, you know, complainants or respondents counsel, all of those are great challenges. And so I'm really, really proud of our team that we've done such an amazing job with this. And then let me talk about a few more numbers. As Carmelyn said, some of the numbers, even as of the new cases and how fast we have been able to resolve them, has really gone up. It's gone up from the number of cases that a 37% decrease in cases that are less than a year old that we're able to resolve. So that's a great number, which means they won't be hanging around for a long time for it to be resolved later. The number of open cases have also reduced. At one point, just a few months ago, we were about at the 1,800 mark, which was extremely high. And we've come down to about 1,165 at this point, which is really where we wanted to be, a manageable number for our attorneys. Our pre-complaint resolutions rose to 406. That's the second highest since fiscal year 2014. And last, I'll talk about testing, which which has been a challenge as we have been teleworking, because we do not send our testers out for in-person testing anymore, because that's a problem during the pandemic. Almost all our testing is done either online or by telephone. We have only 4 testers, and they are all part-time testers because that's what the city allows us to have. And yet in fiscal year 2020, we completed 1,422 entities tested. So 1,422 entities were tested. We did 3,000 plus tests. So you do multiple tests of one entity, that counts of number of tests, but the entities themselves, we did 1,400, which is an amazingly impressive number.
And I believe, am I right, Sapna, and across all of our areas of protection?
Yes.
Yes. So I mean, and you know, Sapna just came back from a recent EEOC conference every year digitally. Annually, the EEOC hosts a conference with all their other fair employment practices agencies. So like similarly situated to us in other jurisdictions, no one, I can assure you right now, no other jurisdiction has the testing program that we do. And consistently across the country, other human rights agencies call Sapna or call our agency asking for advice on how to set up the test. So the fact that we've done that many tests and we've done them in every single category of protection is very, very significant. I also just want to underscore, Sapna mentioned that our pre-complaint resolutions have gone up. And I think that that has been hugely important in helping us also to get down case processing time, and also making sure that we are not delivering delayed justice. So when Sapna is talking about pre-complaint interventions, she's really talking about situations where even without filing an actual complaint, her team working with Frank's team in CRB, they are able to resolve the situation in many instances for the actual relief sought. So if it's, you know, a situation involving perhaps access to a building, you know, it might be about a ramp being built, or it might be about giving somebody the position or giving somebody a housing unit. So the actual relief sought, as well as commission training or follow-ups, or in some instances, commission monitoring to make sure that the entity who had committed that act of discrimination is following the law, knows how to comport themselves, and they are actually doing that into the future. The last thing I want to underscore here is, you might think that because there are case closures, because there's such an increase, that means that the resolutions negotiated are less equitable than they have been in the past. And I wanted to assure you all that that's actually been the opposite, which is, again, why I think this is such an impressive feat for our law enforcement bureau. So at a time when the case resolution times are going down, we've also hit another record year in the amount of both damages that we are able to recover for complainants and people discriminated against, as well as civil penalties in order to deter future acts of discrimination and harassment, as well as increase the use of restorative justice remedies that we have been implementing across both law enforcement, CRB, and other types of resolutions. So we are not compromising on the remedies that people should be receiving. We have stayed true. That's been a North Star of the commission since we came in 2015. We wanted to make sure if someone is filing at the Commission on Human Rights, they're getting the same monetary and otherwise other types of resolutions that they would have received had they filed in court. And that has been a guiding principle of ours since 2015, and we have continued that. So Sapna, are you able to also mention something about mediations?
Yeah, I mean, our mediation program has done an amazing job in record number of the amount and the number of cases have gone up dramatically during the fiscal year. I think the numbers were about $2 million that they got in resolutions for complainants, and I think when we looked at the numbers, it was 7.5 million altogether, which was a record number for not just mediations but LEB, Law Enforcement Bureau in general, getting in as damages and civil penalties for the folks who had filed with us.
That's really wonderful, Sapna. And I think now we will transition over to Frank Joseph, who's our Deputy Commissioner for Community Relations. And Frank can share a little bit about some of the numbers on the CRB side over the last fiscal year.
Thank you, Brittany, and good morning to everyone. As it's been stated a number of times, moving to telework has definitely been a learning curve for so many different people, particularly as we're talking about community relations work. So many folks, whether it's our community-based organizations, our senior centers, other service providers, schools, and after-school programs have had to learn how do they move to this virtual world and still service the communities that they have long worked with. And that's been a challenge for folks for a number of different reasons. And so we have tried to work closely with our CBOs and other partners to ensure that we can continue to educate folks on the city human rights law, continue our events and programming and other conferences. So I'm really impressed by the numbers that our team was able to really produce, the number of New Yorkers that we were able to work with, the new creative programming that we also were able to curate, which you'll hear about a little later on, but I'll just go over some of our MMR numbers really quickly. So in fiscal year 20, we were able to serve nearly 100,000 New Yorkers. The exact number is 99,858, which is 2.5% more than in fiscal year 2019. Of that, we had 13 bystander intervention trainings. Our bystander intervention trainings, we started to work with the Center for Anti-Violence Education of New York because of the increase of anti-Asian stigma and other related COVID-19 related bias incidents. We began to work with CAE to do these bystander intervention trainings in order to equip New Yorkers. These intervention trainings normally are intimate settings. You want to have maybe 10 to a dozen individuals there to create a safe space. We did increase capacity a little more just because of high demand. So from these 13 bias intervention trainings, we were able to reach nearly 500 New Yorkers who now know how to distract, who now know how to intervene whenever they witness an act of hate or bias, and how to do so safely. And when not to do that, when is it appropriate to just document instead of intervening head on. And so that was a real good learning curve, and it became something that many people asked for. We have done them in multiple languages, including Chinese and Korean and Spanish, and are looking to expand them in other languages as well. We also hosted 5 bias and hate crimes reporting town halls because of the COVID-19 related hate crimes and bias incidents that we saw. And we did them in collaboration with our partner agencies, as well as all of the district attorney's offices here in New York City. And this allowed us to reach over 2,000 New Yorkers. And we did these in Japanese, in Tagalog, in Korean, in Chinese, as well as in English. And we, of course, unfortunately, did see an increase in bias incidents, despite the fact that for a few months out of the fiscal year, there was a statewide pause and people were at home. We did see an increase in bias incidents. And so in fiscal year 20, there were 567 bias incidents. Of those 567 bias incidents, unfortunately, we saw 167 of those were anti-Asian related incidents. When we compare that to last fiscal year, it was about 22. We did see a increase, and because of that, some of the programming that I'll mention later on do reflect how we've been both reactive and proactive to what we've seen, heard, and also anticipated as well. Our youth programming, though it was difficult working with schools and after school programs because not all young people have access to Wi-Fi, not all young people have access to a laptop or computer or cell phone or iPad. We still were able to have 300 school and youth-based trainings in fiscal year 20. And even during the pause period, we were able to find creative ways to work with young people because of our partner CDOs and other entities as well. And those are some of CRB's numbers. I look forward to digging deeper into some of the content a little bit more.
And I'll just take a moment to say, Frank's team has been extremely creative in this process of trying to figure out other ways that we could be connecting with different constituents throughout the city, especially I'm going to say in the youth area. And I can say, as a parent also with young children, just knowing that there was such a need in this space, and also a need to be speaking in the language of human rights to youth in this space. Frank's team have come up with, I think, 3 or 4 completely brand new initiatives to be addressing that space and to be connecting with youth. So folks might have seen on some of our digital outlets, they created a program on amplifying youth voices, inviting teenagers across the city to be expressing themselves and their thoughts and ideas about human rights through art. His team created a series called Stories for All, where we put together a very comprehensive book list for children, I want to say pre-K or K. Frank, help me out there. Through
yes, pre-K to 3rd grade.
Of human rights related books that are available at libraries or that are available through, online reading sources, so that parents and teachers and caregivers have somewhere they can be pulling from at this time. And also, we've had different commission staff actually doing read aloud videos. So I know myself, again, just as a mom with young kids, that parents have been really looking for content that they could be sharing with their kids while they're doing other things. So we've tried to fill that void with human rights related read alouds. And then also things like movie nights. So I just wanted to give Frank and his team the praise that they deserve for being incredibly creative during this challenging time.
Great. Thanks for that, Frank. And so now we're going to, we've heard some of the data that gives us a sense of what's happened across the fiscal year. And now we're going to move through some highlights in each department. And we're going to try not to spend too much time, but just to give you a sense of some of the accomplishments, exemplary accomplishments. So I think we'll start with SOPNA and LEB to talk about some of the highlights there.
Brittany, I'm just going to touch on a few of the highlights. We have had a truly incredible fiscal year 20 in settlements. Just in July, we had 22 settlements, which is beyond belief that we had 22 settlements. Usually we have about 5 or 6, so you can imagine how great that was. I'm going to touch a little bit on some of the settlements that came through. 2 of them are in the pregnancy discrimination area. With low-wage workers. We are always interested in addressing those issues with low-wage workers. The first one was with Chipotle. It was a low-wage worker. She was a line cook, and she wanted to be excused from lifting heavy boxes. And they, under our law, you're supposed to engage in a cooperative dialogue. They failed to do that. They did not give her the accommodation that she had requested, and eventually she was fired. That case settled for $46,220. 11,000 plus was in back pay, and 15,000 in ED, and then of course civil penalties. And the other things that were covered in that settlement were that all New York City locations would have their managers trained in pregnancy discrimination, and that we would monitor all those locations for the next year, where they would have to send us whatever requests they get for reasonable accommodations from their staff. And the other was with Westside Supermarkets, another low-wage worker who, once she said that she was pregnant, they reduced her hours, and eventually when she tried to come back after having her child, they terminated her work. And so that we settled for ED in $30,000 and civil penalties in $10,000. And the same thing was that they needed to get trained, of course. Anyone who was involved in hiring decisions needed to get trained in our law, and that they would translate their anti-discrimination policies into Spanish, because a lot of their workers also speak Spanish and may not be able to read the policies in English. The next area I'll cover is sexual harassment. We always have great settlements in sexual harassment cases. This was with Federal Savings Bank, which is actually connected to Paul Manafort. The CEO of that bank was sexually harassing one of the employees there. That case settled for $270,000. $95,000 in back pay, $80,000 in emotional distress, $95,000 in attorney's fees, and $50,000 in civil penalties. They had to change their policies, revise their policies, and put in a new complaint procedure for anyone who was reporting discrimination. And they needed to have clear definitions of what sexual harassment is under our law, which is quite different from federal and state. And mandatory bystander reporting, which is kind of very important in those cases. They were to post their policies and train all their staff, any staff that would have anything to do with New York City. So they did not have to be located in New York City, but if they had any business that connected with New York City, they would have to get trained in our law. And of course, they were going to be monitored also for a whole year to see what, they would have to send us reports every 6 months to tell us what kind of complaints they've gotten about sexual harassment or gender-based harassment. And then I just wanted to touch a little bit on source of income discrimination. What we've started in source of income discrimination cases where people have vouchers, are not able to find housing, is that when we do conciliations, we are now asking for what we call set-asides. That is, the landlord has to set aside a certain number of apartments for people with vouchers. So that's a way of ensuring that a certain number of people will always be there who have vouchers, and that policies will change so that it's not only those set-asides, but other apartments also, if people qualify for them and they have a voucher, they should be able to get those apartments. So we're very, very excited about the set-asides. Right now, we've had a small number of set-asides, but as we go forward and have larger landlords with more units available, we plan to expand that so that we have more set-asides available in more buildings, so that people with vouchers will not find it difficult to find housing. And last, I'll cover two areas where we've actually gotten nationwide coverage through our application of our law through conciliations. One is in gender identity. It was with the YMCA of Greater New York. Their healthcare plans excluded people who were looking for gender affirming care, and they redesigned their plans through our conciliation. And now it includes all transition related procedures. And it's not just for New York City, but nationwide. All of the YMCAs across the country are going to apply that policy as far as healthcare is concerned. And the last is a Fair Chance Act case where criminal history is concerned. It's Aaron's, which is a lease-to-own retailer. That came out of testing. We tested them and found that their application asked for criminal background investigation, that the applicant had to agree to a criminal background investigation. We settled that for $40,000 in civil penalties, but more importantly, they were going to implement the ban the box policy nationwide and not just in New York City. So that's the most exciting part about that, and that they're going to train all their managers for about the ban the box policy and the Fair Chance Act.
So I want to emphasize that in many of our cases involving national employers, what we try to do is we will negotiate on other aspects of the resolution in order to get policies changed across the country, which is, again, I think a fantastic way that we're able to impact human rights in other jurisdictions that have, less strong protections in different areas. So because it is a creature of contract, it is something that the entity is negotiating in exchange for, higher civil penalties or something. We feel that it has had great value. Like why? In the case of the YMCA, we're changing YMC policies across the country, including in jurisdictions that they probably never would have thought to do that because there's not even protections based on gender identity or gender expression in those areas. And then similarly with our fair chance related work. Thanks, Swapna.
Great. And now we'll go to Frank to share just some highlights from the CRB side.
Thank you very much, Brittany. There have been so many different programming that we've put together and worked with partners on. I know many of you, if you remember, in February, we had the launch of the application for our youth council. And this was right before the pause started. And the pause did impact some of it because, as we mentioned, some young people did not have access to Wi-Fi or other things, but we've been able to work diligently with partners, and we had hundreds of people who applied. And during the pause, we did go through them and were able to identify young people who can now serve on our, YES Council, Youth for Equity and Solidarity Council. and we've identified roughly 30 young people, and they will be starting soon. Our first meeting will be later this month. Other youth programming that we've done this fiscal year since we last met, as the commissioner mentioned, was our Amplify Youth Initiative, where it was an arts initiative. We allowed young people to express themselves and tell us what did they see during these last few months, what has impacted them. And so we've seen things addressing, the different racial tension that we've witnessed, the heightened racial tension, the disparities that COVID-19 has unveiled or shined a light on. We've also had a number of Netflix watch parties, which is programming that we put together where, there's always a lot of heavy content. And we said we wanted to come together with community and be able to watch a documentary, a film that highlights a human rights issue and do it in a fun way, and also have some questions that we can put in a chat throughout the duration of, the film in order to create dialogue. So we've watched Crip Camp, which talks about disability rights advocacy. We've watched Secret Love, which talks about LGBTQI rights and the right to marriage. We've watched 13, which talks about the criminal industrial complex as well as racial justice. As I mentioned earlier, we also were able to host 13 bystander intervention trainings. We've done many regional community forums, so looking at what are the issues that Southeast Queens, is dealing with, human rights issues, and how can we bring some of our partner agencies on board? What is the Northwest Bronx dealing with, and how can we bring our partner agencies on board and really have make sure that the city is responsive in a 360 lens instead of just piecemealing our responses together as a city. We've hosted our first known Nepali Communities Town Hall in partnership with IDCAR. I know that also our policy team will talk about the legal enforcement guidance on age discrimination, but we did put together a programming, an intergenerational programming, talking about age discrimination, how it impacts young people and how it impacts older adults in employment. And our very own Rocky Chin was actually the moderator, and it was a really, really great discussion. We've also had staff who spoke on a number of forums that perhaps we did not host, but other organizations hosted. So talking about the impact of COVID-19 on trans women of color, talking about how Jewish communities have long, worked closely with Black communities and what to do in this moment. How can Jewish communities and other faith communities stand up in this moment for people of color, but particularly Black communities? Food disparities and how food disparities has impacted, Muslim communities during the holy month of Ramadan. There were issues that Muslim communities brought up where, the city could have done better. And working with the Food Czar and working with the Mayor's Office of Food Policy, we were able to troubleshoot some of those issues. Certain communities of color were also highlighting to us the food disparities that they face compared to other communities that are not Black and brown. And so we were able to work with our agencies on things such as this. And then also we have programming that address some of our bias incidents. And I know later on we're going to talk about bias incidents. So I'll wait to mention those so I'm not duplicative with the information.
I just want to pause here for a bit because I think consistently what we hear from different communities that we serve in the city is that one of the biggest challenges here is how do communities connect, right? It's through community connection that they're able to build resources, they're able to come together to create strength, in numbers. And a huge challenge in this environment has been figuring out safe, appropriate ways that communities can come together to connect, which is one of the reasons that we've tried to put together some of this programming that Frank was discussing. I want to pause here a little bit for the commissioners, just to open it up a little bit, because again, I'm curious if people have other thoughts or suggestions in this space. We're trying to think about how we do things creatively, how we do things safely. In the past, as you all know, we very successfully would throw together different types of celebratory, know your rights related, just different types, memorial related events. That's such a challenge now. It's such a challenge to figure out how do we pull communities together. And so I guess to the extent that folks have suggestions or you've been seeing in either your own communities or in the communities that you've worked with, other productive ways of doing that, I think we would all be very happy to plan different models as well. So I'm just going to pause in case commissioners would like to have some discussion on that.
If I may, first of all, I think during this pandemic, it's really, in some ways, an added opportunity for us as commissioners to be involved, especially with all these Zooms. So I really encourage the staff to maybe call on us, especially with these youth programs, because we have a diverse commission, to bring us into those conversations. I'm wondering, just getting back to the progress in terms of the LEB work that you're doing and the advisories. Also, do you have an opportunity to meet periodically with some of the leaders in terms of the civil rights community in New York, as well as the faith communities and maybe the bar communities? I guess the last thing is just using social media and the media. Is the media picking up on these, quite frankly, important contributions, I think, of the commission?
Yeah, I can say we've remained, thanks to Vincent and his team, we've remained very active on all of our digital media channels. We're also doing kind of revamps of some of our online spaces actually right now. And in terms of getting together with different civil rights and human rights related organizations, there are several structures already in place for that. There's like the Civil Rights Roundtable type meetings that bring together federal, state, local officials in that space. There are other periodic convenings that happen through the EEOC. There's other convenings that we deal with, that we participate in, that have been put in place from like years on out. And then we've really been, I think, leveraging some of the roundtable discussions. So as I think you all know, it has been our practice while we're looking at either different communities or different issues hitting different communities to pull together different roundtable discussions. Like we pulled together several different roundtable discussions last May for API Heritage Month. We've pulled together roundtable discussions when we're talking about anti-Black racism in relationship to the Black New Yorkers report. We've done that with different Muslim community groups, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so as things come up, we have made sure that our liaisons and lead advisors in Frank Space have been active in pulling together those roundtable discussions. I mean, it's hard to be thinking about creatively on the community level. Again, I'm just going to go back to that, how we help communities keep connected. We've certainly been connecting with a lot of the partner organizations and worker centers that we ordinarily work with, and faith houses of faith and faith-based groups that we work with on the ground. But I wanted to just see if folks had other thoughts or ideas, or have been seeing ways that communities have been coming together in this space that you think we should be leveraging more.
This is Guillermo Chacon. First of all, again, congratulations, an amazing, I know this is our highlights. We cannot go deep into detail, but I know and we know as a commissioners that is a lot of work. My general recommendation is to go deeper on crafting partnership with the ethnic media, because anything that the Human Rights Commission does, I think we has to be, because where we are in New York, we learned that ethnic media go deeper in terms of engagement. The second piece is that I think would be great for the staff to take advantage as we close in a very difficult situation, Census 2020, to take an opportunity to go deeper on the community mapping to understand who is in our neighborhood, because human rights is essential, but we know that a lot of people don't know their rights. And the third issue is in terms of the intersectionality between human rights and xenophobia. We know that I'm very alarmed, especially with a lot of Asian folk that has been attacked with the so-called, oh, you brought the China virus and so on, and we need to confront that. But I think I'm always worried about from the service providers that are in the different neighborhoods and how successful we are. And finally, I love to hear more what we're doing in Staten Island, who we have been learning have been a huge migration of folks to the sometimes you need a visa to go to Staten Island, but it's one of our boroughs, and I think we need to be mindful about that. But once again, thank you for your leadership, Carmelin, but also your wonderful staff. Thank you.
Thank you for all of that, Gear. But just to address a few of the things that you've said and suggested, one, I want everyone to know that we actually 100% of our media ad buys are in ethnic and community media. And that has been the case for the agency since the second year I was here, because we do believe that that is the way that we want to, we have to connect with people where they are and through the sources that they get their news. Perhaps after this, I'm going to ask Vincent to send you a list of some of the ethnic and community media that we've been reaching out to or that we have worked with in the past. And if there are other names that should be on that list, we would welcome that from you or from anyone here on that. Staten Island, as I think you all know, we have a community service center in Staten Island. They are extremely active and busy. And what I love, it's one of our smaller community service centers, but anytime or every time I'm out in community in Staten Island, people always tell me about seeing our staff at different events. I don't know, Frank, if you want to talk a little bit about what the Community Service Center has been doing there recently in the past few months.
Yes, definitely. We've made sure that we're plugged into all the different task forces that are on the island. So thinking about the Richmond County Domestic Assault Task Force, working with Project Hospitality, working with the various faith houses of worship as well. We've hosted a number of community forums on Staten Island as well. So working with the Staten Island Pride Center to ensure that we're talking about LGBTQ rights in this moment, particularly because, Pride was not the same this year. We wanted to make sure that we still let communities know that we are here and the work of the agency. We know that Staten Island has a growing African population. So we hosted a African communities bystander intervention training, which really focused on communities on Staten Island as well. We're working, there is later in the fall on Staten Island, there is a conference that's being put together talking about human rights and hate crimes. And we've been invited to do our race and color workshop, to do our working with transgender people workshop. We've also been invited to sit on a couple of panels. So our engagement on the island is definitely very active, and we try to stay as plugged into the things that the different CBOs are doing, thinking about the Staten Island Black Chamber of Commerce, working with them to ensure that as the reopening occurs, we're talking to business communities as well so that they understand our law, so that we could also tell them about resources. Business communities, when they think about the agency, they think about us as a law enforcement agency. So sometimes they are a little hesitant to work with us, but we let them know that there are resources that they need to know that we're here to protect them as well, because we've seen businesses, because they're owned by women or people of color or immigrant communities, since it was also mentioned to talk about the intersectionality between human rights and xenophobia, we've seen immigrant-owned businesses, under attack or put on fire, or there's graffiti written there. So we've made sure that we are letting them know about our work, that we plug them with our sister agencies as well, so that they understand all of those. And so we've been very, very active on the island, but if there are other things that you think are missing, I'd love to talk to you offline to ensure that we're addressing those needs on the island as well.
Thank you, Frank. I think now we're going to transition to Dana to do some very quick policy updates. So yeah, Dana, do you want to say just a couple quick words and then we can move on?
I'll take 1 minute. So hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. Very, very quickly, it was mentioned earlier, we've released our age discrimination in the workplace guidance or later in the summer, so a month or two ago now. which we worked very closely with the AARP and other age justice related groups. And we hosted a really dynamic conversation around how age discrimination impacts both older workers and younger workers, especially right now, given the economic hardships that we're facing. And Rocky was our moderator. And so that is new legal enforcement guidance. We also published a COVID supplement, since we're getting tons of questions around workplace questions, particularly for older workers, and what accommodations they are entitled to or may need to return to work safely, as many workplaces that had been closed are now contemplating reopening. We have also been regularly updating. We have a COVID-19 and human rights page where we've been regularly updating content and guidance for businesses as providers of public accommodation, for housing providers, and for employers around what they need to do to comply with the city human rights law and, you know, maintain safe workplaces, safe housing, and businesses. And that often concerns people with disabilities or underlying conditions or issues related to age. So all of that is regularly updated, and we will likely roll out more updates in the coming weeks after several roundtable conversations with employment lawyers who continue to have many questions from their clients about how to reopen safely and in compliance with the city human rights law. Finally, just two other quick updates. Our legal enforcement guidance on hair discrimination has been around for a year and a half now. And since we published it last February, we've seen over a dozen jurisdictions pass the Crown Act, banning hair discrimination as a form of race discrimination. We will be finally codifying our own guidance into rules. The hearing is October 15th. We welcome everyone to come and join us. It'll be virtual. We'll hear testimony from experts and stakeholders, and we hope regular New Yorkers about the proposed rules. The rules expand on the original hair guidance focused on hair discrimination as race discrimination. The rules focus on that, but also expand it to cover religion and primarily, and also national origin as well. So we know that this is an issue that cuts across so many different communities. And so we wanted to take the opportunity to codify that in rules. And so we can send additional information about that soon. And then the last update is on Tuesday next week. This just happened. We will be testifying at a hearing that City Council is putting together on a new bill that we are very enthusiastic about, that will prohibit the use of criminal background checks in housing applications. It is permitted for landlords to screen out applicants with a criminal background check. There's only a couple other cities in the country that have passed these bans: Seattle, DC, and I think San Francisco just passed one. This would be a very protective ban. It would basically completely prohibit the use of background checks in nearly all circumstances. And so we will be testifying on that next week, along with bills and oversight on our source of income discrimination work on the use of housing vouchers. So we think it'll likely involve a lot of different stakeholders. It's an issue that a lot of people care deeply about, and it's been a long time that we've been engaged on this issue, and that stakeholders have as well. So I will pause there because I know that we've covered a lot, but thank you all. Great to see you.
Thank you, Dana. So now we're going to transition into a discussion where we hope that there'll be more interactivity. And we want to thank you, of course, for bearing with us and hearing all of our updates and, inserting questions as you can. We're going to change up the way that we were planning to do this. So what we're going to do first is start with a discussion of COVID-19 response and also anti-Asian harassment response. We're going to hear a little bit from Sapna and then from Frank, and then Dana will share a little bit, or rather, I think maybe Vincent will share a little bit about some of our campaign work in those areas. And then Dana will talk a little bit about how we're integrating with the Public Artists in Residence program. We're going to jump around a little bit during this discussion portion, but we really encourage commissioners to interject as you see fit or as you need with questions, so that we can make sure that we get your questions in, even as we try to communicate more to you about these particular priority areas. And we'll also aim to keep our presentations kind of short and concise.
Thanks, Brittany. I'll start, but Frank, feel free to join in and jump in whenever you want to. So as you know, I think we talked about this at the last meeting that we formed a COVID response team, rapid response team, in response to the number of inquiries that we were getting at the beginning of the pandemic. We have about 176 matters that have some kind of COVID-related discrimination alleged. This is one area in which we actually have done a lot of work across the commission. So it's not just been LEB and CRB, but we've had policy folks and people from Office of the Chair. Everyone's been pulled in to work on the COVID response team, rapid response team. As far as the Law Enforcement Bureau is concerned, we usually, if it's not jurisdictional, if there's no discrimination that we can actually do something about as far our law is concerned, we provide referrals to other agencies or resources for folks to go to, or we reach out to the Community Relations Bureau, and Frank's team and our team will work together to see how we can resolve some of the issues. As far as anti-Asian discrimination cases are concerned, we have about 100 inquiries that we got in the Law Enforcement Bureau. Mostly it's street harassment by strangers. And as you know, that's always difficult to bring as a case under our law, because it can be protected speech, even though it might be incredibly offensive to the folks who experience it and traumatizing. You know, even if it's brought under our discriminatory harassment provision of our law, you need to kind of figure out, was there a threat? Was it intimidating? And, you know, are you able to even identify the person? Otherwise, you know, you run into issues about, you know, is it just offensive? So I will turn it over to Frank.
Yeah, I was just about to jump in. I was going to say, and for that, looking at some of the, you know, discriminatory harassment and hate crimes, I'm sure many of people here are aware of the 89-year-old Asian woman in Brooklyn who unfortunately was set on fire. Thankfully, she was able to stop the fire. They set her clothing on fire. NYPD recently said that they found the suspects. They're two 13-year-old boys. But in response to this, the community was outraged, rightfully so, prior to even finding out who the suspects were. And there was a rally in Washington Square Park where the commission was present, standing with the community, talking about our work. We also partnered with Homecrest Services to put together a bystander intervention training, and also were invited at a number of community forums to talk about discriminatory harassment. When we're talking about some of our COVID response work, some of the pre-complaint work, think about that hotel who thinks that someone may have COVID-19 and is kicking the person out, even though they have 3 more nights left. You know, we've been able to intervene in those matters. Or that person who's a frontline worker and their housing provider is saying, because you are more at risk of contracting COVID-19, you can't live here any longer or throughout the duration of the pandemic. We've been able to call and intervene in those incidents, in those matters as well. And so our response when it comes to you know, COVID-19 has been a lot of those pre-complaint intervention, but also as it relates to the anti-Asian bias and stigma that we've seen. Now that there is Asian Hate Crimes Task Force that NYPD has recently launched, we're working very closely with Deputy Inspector Liu, who's in charge of it, and had our during our regular Asian and Pacific Islander communities leaders WebEx, we were able to talk about some of the issues, and that's something that's been ongoing since the beginning of the pandemic up to just last week. We've been having these calls, and it's been very productive, and it serves as a feedback loop to the community. And as it pertains to our work with the Asian Hate Crimes Task Force, in early October, we will have a forum with them for the community, and we'll make sure that we have appropriate language accommodations as well.
Thank you, Frank. And I also wanted to just stop here and see, I don't know, Faiza, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you were interested in just saying a little bit about some of the tensions between, with protected speech in this space, that might be helpful if you have a few words you want to say. But
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, we talked about this a lot when we were looking at the discriminatory harassment policy. And I mean, I think, I think Sapna identified the problems in sort of drawing the line between where something is sufficiently severe and sufficiently documented, really, to allow the commission to take action. I actually had another question, if I may. So, in terms of the coronavirus response, I mean, as people are starting to go back to work, right? I mean, do we have any kind of like, I mean, there's obviously the guidance about, you know, there's obviously issues around what employers have to do to make sure people are safe. But then there's also a question of, you know, what kinds of information employers can demand of employees to kind of allow, sorry, I have to plug my laptop in, have to demand of employees in order to allow them to come back to work. And I was just wondering, you know, if you guys have thought about that or thinking of doing something on it, because I mean, just talking from my own personal experience, I'm seeing that, you know, there's a lot of private actors out there which are engaged in doing sort of health monitoring, right? And I'm wondering, you know, what are the rules around that? You know, what goes on with that data? Because as you know, data privacy, well, Brittany knows this better than many, that we don't have very good data privacy laws. And, you know, the other thing that I have been wondering about is that, you know, there's obviously an extraordinary amount of health information being collected these days, right? People's testing, you know, hundreds of thousands of people, which is good. But I, you know, was trying to figure out, well, you know, where does this data get held? Who has access to it? And I can tell you that for New York, it's not easy to figure it out. And it seems to me that, you know, when you're talking about public health, you know, trust is a really important thing, and people need to be comfortable sharing information with the authorities. And I just wonder whether any of those kinds of issues are on your radar.
I can speak a little bit to this. So we just last week had a roundtable with the College of Employment Lawyers, which includes both management side and worker side. And this was raised a bunch. The EEOC has also put out pandemic workplace guidelines, and we have pretty much adopted most of what they have put out, more or less for ease, so that employers aren't required to navigate sort of different enforcement agencies and standards. And there's a lot that they created back, I think, during H1N1 regarding issues around direct threat to the workplace, the health and safety in the workplace. So, you know, we are thinking about, I think, even more right now, and in the coming weeks, we hope to publish something that's updated around what employers can and can't do with respect to health screenings. I don't know if we're going to specifically address like retention, you know, sort of retention of the data. I think that may come up as well, but I know that a lot of employers don't want to get into in the space of sort of like monitoring people's biometric data all the time. And so to the extent that some employers are continuing to be remote or even thinking about how long they can sustain remote work, that's another conversation that that some of the management bar folks raised, was around sort of, there is this dynamic where some employers have been able to maintain their productivity or their workflow remotely, and now they're trying to figure out who should come back, how do they stagger returns, and not sort of targeting different groups of employees in that way. So there's a lot of, I think, uncharted territory that we'll be trying to think through as we publish the next round of our guidance on this.
Right. Yeah. Can
just to add to that, Faiza, because I'm wondering if there's other sources you have for us on this. I know as different entities are thinking through their kind of reopening plans, one, there had been kind of this initial tension between allowing workers to kind of self-certify before daily entering a workplace, right? Just self-certifying period, versus situations in which, in order to create even more accountability, folks self-certifying and having to, like, whether it's put that information, their certification, into a proprietary app or into something else, and then that information, that certification, if you will, daily being held
confidentially, I think usually by an HR person. So there's that information that you're talking about. And I think, you know, to the extent that you're part of conversations where it says what should happen with that information then that is collected, and I think in some cases it's collected for the day, then expunged, collected from the day and expunged, because these are daily reportings of people coming into their office, reporting that they haven't had a temperature, that they do not have COVID or haven't been around COVID, somebody who has COVID for the last 2 weeks, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think that this is a very active conversation, and to the extent that we could lend some suggestions here to, especially the private bar on this, that would be, we'd be doing a huge service.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to sort of maybe go have a separate conversation that kind of digs into some of this, because we've certainly been thinking about it, you know, both in terms of my own employer, but more broadly as well. But I think as you guys think about it, just one thing that I think is important to understand is that a lot of employers are going to outsource this to third parties. And so it's important to get a handle on what those third parties are doing. So while, you know, the Brennan Center doesn't really want my health information, right? The person or the company that they contract with might have, you know, different ways that they might want to use that information, whether it's at an aggregate level, which is, I think, is more likely than an individual level. But I think that there just needs to be, I think data retention and use is as important to think about as data collection in the first instance. So, and happy to have further conversations offline. The other thing I think would be, and this is just, you know, sort of thinking about the way sort of New York as a state more than as a, and I don't know that, I mean, I think the city has its own issues as well, but when we think about who is collecting the information, right? And it's been really hard to figure out, like, how, for example, does information about testing go from individual doctors' offices to the public health authority? And then who, like, what are the rules around how long that information is kept for, and then who it's shared with? And, you know, one of the issues that people have been concerned about for a long time is sort of law enforcement access to this information, and about how it might be used to target particular communities. So I think those are kind of important issues, which I haven't quite gotten my head around, but it's something that we literally started looking at last week as well, just in terms of looking at what New York is doing. But I think it's something that we really do need to be cognizant of, because obviously, you know, the pandemic requires information collection, and it's really critical to our ability to combat it. At the same time, there are consequences that, you know, may not be anticipated, and we just need to be clear when huge amounts of information are being collected.
This is Guillermo. Excellent points that you raised there, Faiza. I'm very proud member of the Community Advisory Board of the Testing and Tracing, the program in the City of New York. But more important, I was engaged with a broad coalition in both the Assembly and the Senate at the state level, pass a package on confidentiality for the testing and contact tracing, but still pending for a signature from the governor.
Yeah.
And that's what our advocacy focuses. But the issues that you raise, I think, have also touched across the board from a human rights perspective. And I think one of the concerns that we have, especially in the city of New York, is that we need to do a better job to educate the community about the issues that you outlined, and there are areas of concern. And I think that's a piece that I think we need to do a better job. And I think all of us, as a part of one way or another, we know that the forecast for this pandemic is not, it's gonna go deeper in 2021. And for that reason, I think the adaptation and the all those protections must be in place. And I truly believe that we need more leadership in that area. Thank you.
So I'm gonna ask Guillermo and Faiza. We're gonna follow up with you after this because these are things that we've been actively thinking through. And there's no blueprint here, as we all know. So it's a challenging space. That said, it's also fairly exciting for us. As in the past, we're always more than happy to step into the void. There's something good about the fact that there's no precedent in the space, which means that we can actually speak and whatever we put out there becomes the best practice. We've done that in, obviously in other spaces, but there's obviously great discomfort. I mean, even in the conversations that I've had with just some community folks where people, because we're in these unprecedented pandemic times, people are, thinking about different measures that are employed in other countries that, just I think a few months ago we would have balked at. Never would we do something, or hopefully people would have balked at here. So we will definitely be following up with you. And to the other commissioners, if any of you are also interested in being part of those conversations, I'm going to ask you to please let Brittany know. Thanks.
Thanks, Carmelyn, and thanks, Faiza and Guillermo. I just want to do a little time check because we're now at about 12:15 and we're set to wrap up at 12:30, and I really don't want to hold folks later. So in order to facilitate our moving on, I think we're going to go quickly to talking a little bit about the Public Artists in Residence program, and both give Andre and Amanda a couple minutes to say hi, but also show you some of their beautiful work. And so maybe I'll get started, Dana, and then feel free to jump in if there's anything else you want to say. But we're really lucky that this is the second year in which we've had public artists in residence who've worked with us at the agency as part of a partnership with the Department for Cultural Affairs. And so this year we're actually really fortunate to have two amazing artists who are working with us. Our first artist I'll introduce, only because she appears first on my scroll of windows at the bottom of my window, is Amanda Ping Bodhipakia. So Amanda, I will just kick it to you to share a little bit about your background, and then after Amanda shares and after Andre shares, I'm going to have Nico just pull up some of their beautiful artwork so you all can see, because I think it's incredibly compelling. So go ahead, Amanda.
Thanks, Brittany. Hi, everyone. So nice to meet all of you virtually. I know some of you, we've had meetings already that have been very fruitful, and just very honored to be working with all of you to elevate different human rights issues. So a little bit about me. I am a multidisciplinary artist that's based in Brooklyn. Multidisciplinary artist can mean a lot of things these days. So I guess you could say that using color and composition and code, I like to create experiences that are filled with wonder and belonging. So that means anything from large scale murals and sculptures to websites and apps. So I think what you will be seeing on a slide later is some of the work in progress that I've been doing with Frank and his team and different AAPI community leaders around anti-Asian bias and discrimination. And yeah, I look forward to feedback on it and discussing more.
Thank you, Amanda. And so now I'm going to kick it to Andre if you just want to say a few words of introduction.
Yes. Hi, nice to meet you all. Thanks for having me. Met a few of you, but my name is Andre Wagner. I'm a photographer. I mainly kind of make work as a street photographer, but I also work in a lot of different ways where I do journalism and I do a lot of like commission projects. I do a lot of work with the New York Times. I've worked on movie sets, and so kind of bend and mold into just different ways of making photographs. But I think the thing that's always key is just doing work that's really personal to me. So I think, that's really at the forefront of what I do. And I guess I'll be seeing you all in a couple of weeks when I do my artist talk, and I'll be able to share more pictures and just kind of more background about the work that I make. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Andre. And so now Nico's just going to share a couple of images of both of your work. So this is one of Andre's photographs, and you can learn more by visiting andredwagner.com. And then these images are from, as Amanda described, some works in progress that she's been developing specifically related to anti-Asian harassment.
Yeah, I'm just going to also add, we're extremely lucky that we have these two amazing, fantastic, talented, and also like activist artists to be working with us at this time, because especially at a time of, having budget cutbacks, they're both going to be kind of instrumental in helping to amplify the work that we do and our messaging in ways that we likely would not have been able to do if they were not in residence at the agency because of our budget cutback. So what you're seeing right now on the screen is, as Amanda said, a work in progress that we will be using as part of a campaign addressing anti-Asian bias and stigma throughout the city.
Thanks, Carmelyn. So again, just to, and thank you both, Amanda and Andre, really, really excited to have you on board and very grateful that you were able to join us for this meeting. So I'm going to transition now into a little bit of some highlights on our work related to anti-Black racism. So I'll just do a little bit of an update on the follow-up from our report on anti-Black racism. And then I totally invite Sapna and Frank to kind of jump in with any quick things that they want to share on that topic. But after that, we'll transition to a few words from Liz Bender as well, who's been working with us and leading our work around restorative justice. And there are, of course, some connections between those two areas, which I'm sure you'll be able to see. But on anti-Black racism, so as you all will remember, shortly before our last meeting, the Commission released its report, Black New Yorkers on their experiences with anti-Black racism. That report was based on a series of interviews and focus groups that we partnered with a Black researcher named Tracy Pugh to conduct beginning in the spring of 2018. So this was quite a long time in the making. We did 19 focus groups with about 190 Black New Yorkers, as well as a series of interviews with racial justice leaders from across different parts of the city. We really worked to build a group of people that, reflected at least some of the diversity of New York City's Black communities. So, we talked to folks who are veterans. We talked to folks from different LGBTQIA communities. We talked to folks from all 5 boroughs. We talked to folks of different age groups, et cetera. And what they ended up describing to us, I think, was incredibly compelling, although it was not necessarily incredibly surprising. So people shared with us that anti-Black racism was something they were experiencing on the interpersonal level and interactions on their, on their streets and in their communities, at work, something that they were experiencing when they were interacting with important institutions, whether those were public institutions or private institutions across the city, as well as the, phenomenon that they were observing on and, articulating in structural ways, right? So people talked, we asked folks to let us know where were they experiencing the most racism. They talked to us quite a bit about their experiences with law enforcement, their experiences with housing and in their neighborhoods, and their experiences in education, as well as, of course, having being subject to racism and discrimination in, on the job, when seeking out health services, in their, in the programs and the offerings that they saw were available to youth. And so based on all of this, we've been following, we already had a set of recommendations in the report. We had identified public policy, obviously, is a really important place where the Commission can help to, either clarify or create new protections supporting Black New Yorkers. We've been having conversations with many of the same groups who participated in these focus groups over the last couple months to get a sense of their current policy priorities, in light of COVID, in light of the increased focus on racial justice issues. And, we're excited to, start digging into that work, looking at some things related to public accommodation. So what can we do related to the kind of harassment, discrimination that Black New Yorkers regularly experience when they go to stores or bars or restaurants. What can we be doing to, address issues related to anti-Black discrimination in employment? So trying to identify whether there might be resources we can cull together to help us do that in new ways, or additional work in that area. Looking at what we can do related to, people's experiences in healthcare settings. So I think there is quite a bit that we'll be able to develop out and talk about in more detail in the coming weeks and months. But I will maybe pause there and see if there's anything that Frank or Sapna wants to throw in, or Carmelyn, if there's anything that you want to add there.
You're muted, Frank.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted myself. Yeah, thank you very much, Brittany. One thing that I was going to mention is that I'm sure many of you saw the alleged news sightings or heard about the alleged news sightings in parks throughout the city. Many of them, NYPD found that they were construction rope or a forestry rope that were, they just had knots tied and weren't classified as nooses. Or Dominic Alexander, a young 27-year-old Afro-Latinx man who was found hanging in Fort Tryon Park. That was ruled to be a suicide. Whether or not suicide or homicide or has a knot that looks like a noose, these are traumas that impact community. So we've been working with the Parks Department to talk about what can both of our agencies do together to address the rise in hate symbols that we've seen in parks. Because outside of these two incidents or many incidents that we've seen, there has been an increase of hate symbols in parks. And so we are going to be working, very collaborative with the Parks Department on those as well. So please be on the lookout, and we'll make sure that we update you all if there is any of those engagements that you'd like to also be an active participant in.
And from the law enforcement perspective, I'll just quickly remind everyone about organizational standing, and that organizations can bring an action to our, with our law enforcement bureau to the commission. So it doesn't have to be an individual. I'll leave it at that because I know that Liz needs to speak.
Thank you, Sapna. And yes, I will kick it to Liz to talk a little bit about our restorative justice work.
Thanks, Brittany, and it's nice to see everyone. I don't think I've met all of you, so I'm Liz Bender. I'm Senior Policy Counsel here at the Commission. Nice to see all of you. Really quickly, I want to highlight a couple of things under our restorative justice umbrella. One of the things I think is really great that Frank actually already touched on is our work around how anti-Black racism has turned parks and other public spaces in New York City into actually very exclusive spaces. And I think the one very concrete, very horrific example of that is the story we all saw in the news of Amy Cooper calling the police on Christian Cooper, who was a Black man who was bird watching in Central Park. And we talked a lot at the commission about the fact that there is, yes, this sort of interpersonal act of racism that's abhorrent and that deserves a response, but there's such a wide ripple effect because of how frequently that video is shared, and all the different sort of harms and consequences that come with that, and how they are very individual, down to a person-to-person level, but also among community, and really it's a city-wide level of harm. And so we talked about how can we have a role in giving folks the space to talk about that, and a traditional restorative justice framework would tell us, you get the person in the room who committed the harm along with the people who are harmed, and they have a conversation in a circle and they figure out what does accountability look like. Well, there's not going to be that relationship in a lot when you're talking about a community scale of harm. And so we started talking to some community groups that already existed. So some sort of like political organizations, some faith-based organizations, neighborhood coalitions, and asked them, would you be interested in us matching you up with trained restorative justice facilitators to hold a virtual talking or healing circle? And we actually just completed, we weren't there. We made the connection between facilitators and a group of organizers in Harlem who really wanted to talk about especially anti-Black racism in parks. And we connected them to facilitators from the New York Peace Institute, and they had a 2-session circle. And actually now in a couple of weeks, myself and a colleague of mine in our Community Relations Bureau is going to meet with that group of organizers and talk about not just what came out of that meeting that they want to share, but also talk about policy initiatives that they have thought about and suggestions they have for us, and just be that sort of set of ears from the city saying, like, we see that this harm has impacted more than just that individual person. Really looking forward to expanding that conversation into other neighborhoods. We are talking to folks in Riverdale around some incidents in Van Cortlandt Park, some folks in Washington Heights and Inwood, where I actually live, around some incidents in Fort Tryon Park. So I'm really excited to grow that out and see where it goes. And 2 other quick things I'll mention. We've convened a group of experts, local practitioners and experts in restorative justice into an advisory panel that also meets quarterly, which has just been tremendously helpful to us. Really excited about that. We're about to have our 2nd meeting at the end of this month. And then the other thing I'll say is that we did update our webpage, and I want to give a big shout out to Vincent, who was so helpful to me in getting that launched. But please, I encourage you to check out the webpage. Underneath the About tab, there is an entire new page around restorative justice that has some information and really sort of tries to express to the city what our philosophy is around incorporating this into our work. And if folks have further questions or thoughts about this, I'm always available and happy to chat over email or phone about it.
Thanks, Liz.
I just want to say we're coming up on 12:30. We're going to be wrapping up. I wanted to leave, if people had an extra 5 minutes to stay for discussion. I know this has been a lot of commission folks speaking at the commissioners, and my apologies for that. It's just been an incredibly busy period for us, and we wanted to make sure we were catching you all up on the work so that frankly you all can be proud of the institution that you're also part of. But if I wanted to maybe leave it open for like 5 minutes of discussion, and we can prioritize more discussion, of course, during the next quarterly meeting. So just last call of anything from commissioners, you could just unmute yourself and speak.
I just, Guillermo, again, this meeting, but truly, Carmelyn, congratulations to your team. Amazing work. We're here to support you, and we're so proud, to be part of this important institution. Thank you, everyone. Please be safe.
Thanks, Guillermo.
Hey, Carmelyn, it's Jonathan.
Yes.
I'd like to, Liz, I'd like to get involved in what's going on in Riverdale. I live in Riverdale. I'm sort of aware of what some of these issues are with Van Cortlandt Park. I've heard it be brought up at the local community board level. So if someone can connect us, I don't think I have your email, but I'd like to get involved in that. And then just a general question. I know we talked a lot about what's been done. Could we just get a sense of what's on the agenda for the remainder of 2020 in terms of priorities?
Sure. I think it's not going to be anything new because some of the priorities that have been the case in the past few months / year continue to be issues. So I think we're still doing a lot on anti-Asian, anti-Black, anti-Semitic. We're kind of thinking through also, since we're, in terms of looking at the term, we're also at a point where we're also trying to figure out how some of the wonderful programming and one of wonderful kind of enforcement mechanisms we've created during our time here can be, solidified for the future. What's been always a challenge, I think, for this agency is its size
and its space within the city administration. We're one of the smallest independent city agencies. And so from a budget, personnel, other space, it's always been an area, I think, where, and Jonathan, you probably know this even better than most people, having come from city government as well. It's always an area where I think, the city takes from. And so really understanding that human rights is going to be integral, like a focus on being able to speak in the language of human rights, making sure that across different agencies, there's an awareness of human rights related issues. We're really also focused on how do we make sure that we are so interwoven into those agencies, and our processes have been so solidified that in the future, it becomes more difficult to undo that progress. And in the future, it becomes more difficult to kind of, take away from those spaces to reallocate into other spaces. But in terms of issue areas, I'm going to say anti-Asian, anti-Black, anti-Semitic are still going to be kind of three of the three topmost priorities, and also just really focusing again on keeping our case processing time down in a manageable space, and making sure ideas of restorative justice are infused throughout. So Jonathan, I think we would love your engagement on some of the work that we're talking about in your area. So thanks for volunteering for that.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone, to all the staff. I know you're all working under, tremendous difficulty just from working remote, and it seems like you've really been able to lean in and become more productive than ever under extremely trying circumstances. So kudos to everyone on the staff. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jonathan. Okay, so just being
respectful of folks' time, I think we can conclude. Is that right, Brittany? Unless there's anything else?
Yeah, we've reached the end of the agenda.
Okay, so it is 12:35, and I'm saying we're going to conclude this quarterly commissioners meeting. Thank you all so much for being flexible with us during this meeting, for your input, for volunteering to be involved in our future discussions and our future work. Thank you all so much.